Elena wiped the condensation from her work goggles and stared up at the towering hydroponic vines that stretched toward the dome's translucent ceiling. Her primitive solution to their food crisis had started as desperate improvisation: salvaged pipes, recycled nutrient tanks, and modified algae beds that would have made any proper agricultural engineer cringe. But like everything else humans did here in low tier, they'd turned desperation into innovation. The Coronix had called it mercy when they gave humans the worst survival dome on their combat training world. A humanitarian gesture to house the refugees of Earth's latest catastrophe. They'd given Elena's people the lowest grade environment, minimal resources, and expected them to die quietly while the advanced species in the upper tiers thrived. That was 3 years ago. Now their gardens fed half the dome's population. "Elena," the voice crackled through her worn comm unit. "We need you at Section 7, now." She recognized Kai's clipped tone. Their head of security never used that edge unless something was truly wrong. Elena grabbed her tool belt and broke into a run, weaving through the maze of gardens and repurposed machinery that had turned their death sentence into survival. The closer she got to Section 7, the more she could smell it: burning ozone and superheated metal. A crash, but their dome hadn't received supply drops in months, and the Coronix observation ships never came this low. She rounded the corner into chaos. A sleek vessel, clearly not of low-tier design, had punched through their outer membrane. The dome's self-repair systems were already sealing the breach, but that wasn't what made Elena's breath catch. It was the pilot being pulled from the wreckage. Human, male, and wearing the pristine uniform of an upper-tier scientist. "He's alive," Kai reported, his dark features tight with concern. "But he's not going to stay that way if we don't get him to medical." Elena moved closer, professional curiosity warring with caution. Upper-tier humans were rare. Most had died in the first year, their bodies unable to adapt when their advanced systems failed. This one was different. Despite his unconscious state, she could see the lean muscle of someone used to working with their hands. His face was young but weathered, like someone who'd seen too much too fast. "I'll help carry him," Elena said, already moving to assist. "But we need to catalog everything in that ship before." The dome's warning system blared to life, its deep tone echoing off the curved walls. Elena's blood went cold. That wasn't the normal breach alarm, that was something worse. "Coronix vessels," Kai confirmed, checking his modified scanner. 3 of them breaking from high orbit. "They're coming for him." Elena looked at the unconscious man, his breathing shallow but steady. Whatever he knew, whatever he'd done, it was important enough to bring the observers down from their lofty perches. She made her decision. "Get him to my personal lab in Sector 4. The gardens mask life signs. They won't be able to scan through the biomass." "Elena," Kai warned, "if they find him here." "They won't," she cut him off, already plotting routes through the hydroponics maze. "Because they still think we're too primitive to hide anything properly. Now move." They carried him through the twisting paths of Elena's domain, where stolen tech merged with desperate innovation. The gardens had started as survival, but they'd become something more: a shield, a weapon, a statement of human defiance. Her lab was really more of a converted storage pod, wedged between massive tanks of algae and experimental plant beds. They laid the stranger on her work table as gently as possible. "I'll coordinate defense," Kai said, already backing toward the door. "Buy you as much time as I can, but Elena," he hesitated, "be careful. Upper-tier humans, they're not like us. They haven't had to adapt." Elena nodded, but her attention was already on her patient. His breathing had steadied, and in the better light she could see the details she'd missed before. His hands were calloused despite the fine uniform. Burns and cuts marked his forearms, the signs of someone who did their own repairs. Most telling was the way he'd modified his supposedly perfect, upper-tier clothing with practical additions. Reinforced panels, extra pockets, clip points for tools. Maybe, she thought, he'd been adapting in his own way. The dome shuddered as the first Coronix ship docked. Elena activated her makeshift security screens, repurposed agricultural sensors that now monitored for unauthorized movement. They had minutes at best. "Come on," she muttered, checking his vital signs with salvaged medical equipment. "Wake up and tell me what was worth crashing into the lowest tier of hell." As if hearing her, his eyes fluttered open. They were a startling shade of gray and instantly alert despite the crash. Where? He tried to sit up, winced. Easy, Elena pressed him back down. You're in low tier, Sector 4, and we have about 3 minutes before the Coronix tear this dome apart looking for you. He focused on her face, assessment replacing confusion. You're the agricultural engineer, Elena Shaw. Your work on adaptive hydroponics is why I came here. Elena blinked. You crashed into my dome because of my gardens. Because you proved it could work. He grabbed her arm, grip desperate but weak. The upper tiers are failing, all of them. The Coronix, this isn't just a training world. It's an elimination game, and humans weren't supposed to survive this long. Another tremor ran through the dome. Elena's screens showed Coronix search parties entering through the main airlocks. Their insectoid forms moved with precise efficiency, scanning as they went. I'm Drake, he managed. Drake Connor, and I can prove what they're doing. But I need your help, because you've already done something they thought was impossible. What's that? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You made this broken dome into a fortress. Now we just have to show them why that was their biggest mistake. Elena looked at her screens, then back at the injured man who'd brought the wrath of their alien observers down on her home. She should turn him in. Should protect her people, her gardens, everything they'd built. But she hadn't survived 3 years in low tier by playing it safe. All right, Drake Connor, she said, already plotting routes through her hydroponics maze. Let's show them what humans can really do. The first explosion rocked the outer sections of the dome. Elena's screens showed Coronix search parties splitting into systematic patterns, their crystalline armor refracting the garden lights. Can you walk? She was already gathering essential supplies, her tablet, med kit, and the modified tools that doubled as weapons. Drake swung his legs off the table, movements stiff but determined. If the alternative is getting caught, I can run. Good, because we're about to do a lot of that. Elena checked her screens one last time, then shouldered her pack. The gardens aren't just for food. They're a maze and they mask life signs. But we need to keep moving. The Coronix will figure it out eventually. They already have. Drake pulled something from his uniform, a small data crystal. That's why they're here. Your gardens shouldn't work, Elena, not with the resources you had. But they do, and that terrifies them. Another explosion, closer this time. Elena led them through a narrow passage between towering hydroponic stacks, the plants brushing their shoulders as they moved. What do you mean, shouldn't work? The question came out sharper than intended. These gardens had been her life for 3 years. We adapted, used what we had. Exactly. Despite his injuries, Drake kept pace. The upper tiers had everything, perfect conditions, advanced tech, unlimited resources. But when systems started failing, they couldn't adapt. Wouldn't adapt. Too reliant on tech they didn't understand. They reached a junction where 4 garden paths met. Elena chose the route that looked least maintained, knowing her people would understand the signs she left: broken leaves, disturbed soil patterns. A code they'd developed for emergencies. But you did understand it, she said, pieces clicking into place. That's why you're here. You figured out what they were doing with the tech. Drake's laugh held no humor. I was their perfect test subject. Upper-tier scientist, specialized in xenotech integration. I was supposed to prove humans could advance quickly if given the right tools. He paused, checking behind them. Instead, I proved we're dangerous because we question everything, even gifts. Elena processed this as they moved deeper into the garden maze. The Coronix chatter was more distant now, but that meant nothing. They were methodical hunters. The gardens, she vaulted over a fallen hydroponics tube, then helped Drake across. They're not just about our survival, are they? We did something they didn't expect. You did something impossible. Drake's gray eyes locked onto hers. You merged their discarded tech with Earth techniques they considered primitive. Created hybrid systems that shouldn't function but do, and worse, you taught others to do it too. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Every innovation they'd managed, every desperate adaptation that kept them alive, it wasn't just survival. It was proof that humans could take the Coronix's technology and transform it into something new. The upper tiers, Elena led them through a particularly dense section of vegetation. You said they're failing. How? Systematically. The Coronix give us their tech, but keep us dependent on their understanding of it. When systems fail, we're supposed to wait for their solutions. His voice hardened. 3 days ago, they shut down life support in Tier 7, called it a regrettable accident. 2,000 people dead because they refused to adapt. Elena stopped so suddenly that Drake nearly ran into her. That's why you crashed here. You're not just running from them, you're trying to warn us. I'm trying to save what's left of humanity in this hell they built. He gripped her shoulder, the contact sending an unexpected current through her. Your gardens prove we can survive without them. Better than that, we can take their cast-offs and make something better. The low tier shouldn't just be surviving, Elena, it should be dying. That's what it was designed for. A new alarm blared through the dome, high and piercing. Elena's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. They're shutting down environmental controls. She grabbed Drake's arm, pulling him toward a hidden access panel. They're going to try to freeze us out. But Drake was smiling, a fierce, determined expression that transformed his whole face. No, he said, they're going to try, and that's exactly what we need them to do. Elena stared at him. What are you talking about? Your gardens, he gestured to the thriving plants around them. They don't just feed people, they're a complete environmental system, one that works better than the Coronix tech because it's adaptive, living. And if we can prove that to the other tiers, we can show them how to survive. Elena finished, mind racing ahead. We can teach them to adapt before the Coronix kill more people. The temperature was already dropping. Soon frost would start forming on the outer walls. But Elena felt a different kind of heat building, the familiar fire of human defiance. All right, she said, pulling up schematics on her tablet. I've got a crazy plan, but you're going to have to trust me. Drake's smile turned softer, but no less determined. I crashed into the most dangerous tier on this world to find you. Trust isn't going to be a problem. Elena tried to ignore the way. Her pulse jumped at those words. They had work to do, a dome to save, maybe even humanity itself. But as she led Drake deeper into her garden fortress, she couldn't help thinking that the Coronix had made their biggest mistake not in underestimating human adaptability, but in giving them something worth fighting for. The maintenance tunnels beneath Sector 4 were a maze of retrofitted pipes and salvaged wiring, another example of low-tier adaptation. Elena moved confidently through the narrow space, her boots silent on the metal grating. The Coronix never come down here, she explained, voice barely above a whisper. They think it's too primitive, just basic waste management systems. But it's not. Drake ducked under a cluster of modified cables. You've turned it into something else. We turned everything into something else. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. That's what they never understood. Humans don't just use tools, we reimagine them. They reached a junction where several tunnels converged. Elena knelt beside what looked like a simple water processing unit. Her fingers found hidden catches, and a panel slid away to reveal a sophisticated control interface. This is how we survived the first winter, she said, fingers flying over the controls. When they cut environmental support, we had to find a way to generate our own heat. The gardens helped, but they weren't enough. Drake leaned closer, studying the setup. You're using their own cooling system against them, redirecting the thermal bleed from their tech. Better, Elena allowed herself a small smile. We improved it. Their system wastes almost 40% of potential energy. We found a way to capture and redirect it. Above them, the dome shuddered. The temperature was dropping faster now. The Coronix weren't being subtle anymore. They're getting desperate, Drake observed. This level of response. They must know I downloaded more than just system specs. Elena's hands stilled on the controls. What exactly did you find? Proof that this isn't just a training facility. It's an elimination test. His voice was tight with controlled anger. The Coronix have done this before, find species with potential, offer them technology and sanctuary, then systematically weed out the ones who can't evolve the way they want. And humans aren't playing by the rules. Elena felt a fierce satisfaction at that. We're not just accepting their tech, we're changing it. Worse than that. Drake pulled out the data crystal again. We're proving their entire premise wrong. They believe advancement only comes from following their path. But look at what you've done here in low tier. You've created hybrid systems they never imagined. You're not just surviving their test, you're rewriting it. Another tremor ran through the dome, and this time Elena heard the distinct crack of structural supports under stress. The Coronix were done playing nice. They're going to tear this place apart to find you. She finished her adjustments and stood. And we're going to let them. Drake raised an eyebrow. That sounds less than optimal. Trust me, Elena led him deeper into the tunnel network. 3 years ago, they gave us their cast-off tech and expected us to die when it failed. Instead, we studied it, understood it, made it better. She paused at another junction, checking her tablet's readout. And we built in a few surprises. They emerged into a larger chamber that hummed with repurposed machinery. Banks of salvaged displays showed the dome's status and the systematic shutdown the Coronix were initiating. They think they control this place. Elena moved to a central console. But we built redundancies into everything. More than that, we built in countermeasures. Understanding dawned in Drake's eyes. You're not just going to show them you can survive their shutdown. No, Elena's fingers flew across the controls. We're going to show everyone that their tech works better in human hands. That adaptation isn't just about survival, it's about revolution. She entered the final command sequence, and the chamber's hum changed pitch. Throughout the dome, hidden systems began to activate, 3 years of human innovation about to be unveiled. The other tiers. Drake moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. If they see this, they'll know they have a choice. Elena met his gaze. We just have to prove it works. Above them, the dome's temperature continued to plummet. Ice crystals formed on the upper sections, exactly as the Coronix planned. But they didn't know about the thermal redistributors Elena's team had built into the garden systems. Didn't understand how humans had turned their precious technology into something new. Elena, Drake's voice was soft but urgent. When this works, and it will work, they're going to do worse than shut down life support. The Coronix don't allow challenges to their system. Good, she checked the final readings, then straightened. Because we've got a few more surprises for them. Ready to show them why picking this fight was their biggest mistake. His hand found hers in the dim light, warm despite the falling temperature. Lead the way. Elena squeezed his hand once, then released it. They had work to do, a dome to save. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to show the galaxy why humanity's greatest strength wasn't the ability to use advanced technology, but to imagine better ways to use it. Together, they moved through the hidden heart of low tier, where human ingenuity was about to remind the Coronix why you should never underestimate a species that thrived on impossible odds. The real fight was just beginning. The first sign that their countermeasures were working came as a whisper through the gardens. Where frost should have been claiming the outer walls, a gentle warmth radiated from Elena's hybrid systems. The plants themselves seemed to pulse with captured energy, their modified genetics another quiet victory of human adaptation. Coronix search parties are converging on Sector 6, Elena reported, checking her screens. They've realized something's wrong with the shutdown sequence. Drake studied the thermal readings over her shoulder. The energy conversion is incredible. You're not just redirecting their cooling system, you're amplifying it. Necessity builds better engineers than any academy. She led them through a maintenance shaft that connected to her primary control center. When standard solutions fail, you either adapt or die. We chose to adapt. The control center was hidden behind what looked like a failed hydroponics project. Withered vines concealing a sophisticated setup of salvaged tech and human innovation. Elena's fingers danced across familiar controls, bringing up dome-wide systems. There, she pointed to spreading patterns of heat signatures. The gardens aren't just surviving their shutdown, they're treating it like a resource. Every blast of cold they send just feeds our thermal web. Drake's expression was equal parts admiration and tactical assessment. They'll switch strategies when they realize. Probably try to. The dome's structure groaned as external pressure suddenly increased. Emergency alerts flashed across Elena's screens. Crush us! She finished his thought, already implementing countermeasures. They're trying to compress the dome. Standard procedure when they want to remind us how fragile human construction is. But Drake was smiling. Except it's not standard human construction anymore, is it? Not even close. Elena activated their structural reinforcement grid, another hybrid of Coronix tech and human engineering. 3 years of constant pressure taught us to build better support systems, more flexible, more adaptive. Through the screens, they watched the dome shift under the assault. But instead of buckling, it moved like a living thing, redistributing pressure through Elena's modified framework. Beautiful, Drake breathed, and Elena wasn't sure if he meant the engineering or something else. But they'll escalate. The data I stole, it proves they've wiped out entire species for less than what you've accomplished here. Good thing we're not planning to give them the chance. She pulled up a new set of schematics. See these conduits? They don't just connect our systems, they link to every tier above us. The Coronix built them as waste management, but we turned them into a network. Understanding lit Drake's face. You can transmit data through the power signatures. Show the other tiers what you've built. Better, Elena's fingers flew across the controls. We can teach them how to build it themselves. Every failure the Coronix engineered, every system they designed to break, we can show them how to turn it into something stronger. Another assault rocked the dome, harder this time. The Coronix were done testing. Through the screens, Elena watched their ships move into attack formation. They're going to try to breach the outer membrane, Drake warned. Once they realize they can't crush us, they'll... Let them, Elena's voice held steel beneath the calm. Because that's not our outer membrane anymore. 3 years of raids and salvage operations. We replaced it months ago. They just never scanned deep enough to notice. She entered a final sequence, and hidden panels throughout the dome began to activate. Systems the Coronix had dismissed as primitive now hummed with repurposed energy. The gardens themselves seemed to brighten, bioluminescent modifications coming online. We're not just going to survive their attack, Elena said, straightening from the controls. We're going to show every tier what humanity does best, take something meant to break us and turn it into something revolutionary. Drake moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him even through the dome's falling temperature. You could have shared this technology before, could have reached out to the upper tiers, and watched the Coronix shut us down before we were ready, she shook her head. We needed proof it worked, needed to perfect it. And we needed someone with access to their core systems, he finished. Someone who could prove what they're really doing here. And now we have both. The dome shuddered as the first Coronix strike hit their outer membrane. But instead of shattering, the enhanced barrier absorbed the energy, channeling it into Elena's waiting systems. Throughout the gardens, lights pulsed with captured power. Ready to show them what humanity's really capable of? She held out her hand to Drake, an echo of trust freely given. He took it without hesitation, his grip strong and sure. Lead the way. Together, they moved through Elena's transformed domain, where human ingenuity was about to remind the galaxy's most advanced species of an ancient truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the strongest weapon or the most advanced technology. Sometimes it's the simple, unstoppable power of human beings who refuse to break. The real revolution was just beginning. The Coronix's first real attack came as a wave of concentrated energy designed to shatter their supposedly primitive barriers. Elena watched through her screens as the blast struck and felt fierce pride when their hybrid membrane didn't just hold, but transformed. The surface rippled like liquid metal, channeling the attack's power through pathways Elena's team had spent months perfecting. Gardens throughout the dome blazed with absorbed energy, their modified plants drinking in the excess like desert flowers in a storm. They'll detect the power signature change, Drake warned, though his voice held more excitement than concern. They're realizing this isn't standard human tech. Good. Elena's fingers danced across her controls, redirecting the captured energy. Because this is the part where we show them what happens when you give humans 3 years to improve your perfect systems. Through the dome's enhanced sensors, they watched the Coronix ships reposition. Their crystalline forms caught the light of multiple moons, beautiful and lethal. Second attack pattern forming, Drake reported, falling easily into tactical analysis. They're switching to sonic disruption. Elena was already adjusting their defenses. Standard protocol when they think a species is using bootleg versions of their tech. They'll try to shatter our systems with resonant frequencies. The attack came in waves of invisible force. In the upper tiers, it would have shut down any unauthorized tech, leaving the inhabitants helpless. But Elena's gardens had long since evolved past such vulnerabilities. They still think we're just copying their designs, she explained, watching their hybrid systems adapt. They don't understand that we stopped trying to replicate their tech 2 years ago. we made something better. Through the screens, they could see confusion rippling through the Coronix attack patterns. Their ships held position, sensors presumably trying to understand why their standard tactics weren't working. "We need to move fast," Drake said, studying the tactical display. "Once they realize they can't shut us down remotely, they'll send in ground forces." Elena nodded, "which is exactly what we've been waiting for." She pulled up a new set of controls, revealing systems that looked nothing like standard Coronix technology. These displays showed organic patterns, flowing data streams that mimicked natural growth. "The gardens aren't just for show," she explained, pride evident in her voice. "Every plant, every adaptation, every primitive solution we created, they're all connected. Living technology evolved to respond to threats." Drake's eyes widened as he understood. "You've built a biological defense network, one they can't hack because it doesn't follow their rules of engineering." "Better," Elena's smile held 3 years of careful planning. "We built a teaching network, one that can show the other tiers how to grow their own." She entered a complex sequence, and the garden systems began to pulse with new purpose. Throughout the dome, specialized plants released clouds of microscopic spores, not harmful, but carrying something far more dangerous to the Coronix's plans: information. "The spores contain data," Elena explained as they watched the particles spread. "Encoded in their DNA, everything we've learned, every adaptation we've perfected. When the Coronix breach our walls, they'll carry the solution to every other tier." Drake's voice held wonder. "Hidden in something so primitive, they won't even think to scan for it." The dome shuddered as the first Coronix ground forces cut through their outer barriers. Elena watched them enter through her screens, their crystalline forms moving with mechanical precision. "They think they're here to shut us down," she said softly, "to eliminate another failed experiment, but they're actually here to learn what happens when you give humans a reason to innovate." Drake's hand found hers in the dim light of the control center. "And what happens when you give them someone worth fighting for?" Elena met his gaze, seeing her own determination reflected there. "They learn why Earth's history is full of impossible victories." Above them, the dome systems hummed with gathered power. Around them, the gardens pulsed with evolutionary purpose. And through it all, microscopic particles carried the seeds of revolution to every corner of their imprisoned world. Ready to show them why humanity's greatest weapon was never technology. Elena squeezed Drake's hand once, then turned to her controls. His answer was a fierce smile that matched her own. "Ready to remind them why you never back humans into a corner." Together, they prepared to teach the galaxy's most advanced species a lesson about the real meaning of evolution. Because sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to create perfect technology. Sometimes it's the power to imagine something better, and humanity had always excelled at impossible dreams. The Coronix ground forces moved through Elena's gardens like a crystalline tide, their armor refracting the bioluminescent light in fractals. Through her screens, she watched them pass beneath clouds of invisible data, unknowingly carrying humanity's revolution deeper into the dome. "First wave has breached Sector 3, Drake reported, monitoring their tactical display. "They're moving in standard search patterns, but," he frowned, "something's wrong. Their formations are too rigid, too predictable." Elena nodded, fingers moving across her hybrid controls. "They're used to dealing with salvaged tech, direct copies of their systems. They're looking for familiar threats, not living architecture that learns." Drake's voice held quiet appreciation. "How long before they realize?" A series of alerts flashed across Elena's screens. Throughout the dome, her modified plants were responding to the intruders, subtle changes rippling through their neural networks. "They're already starting to." She highlighted a section where Coronix forces had paused, their sensors likely detecting unusual energy patterns. "But by the time they understand what we've built, it'll be too late to stop it." Drake moved closer, studying the spreading web of activity. "The other tiers are already receiving data packets through the maintenance systems, aren't they? Started transmitting the moment they breached our outer walls." Elena allowed herself a small smile. 3 years of research, compressed into organic code. Everything from basic survival modifications to complete system overrides. Through the screens, they watched the Coronix forces begin to alter their search patterns. Their movements became more cautious, less certain, as their sensors detected increasing anomalies. They're realizing the gardens aren't just decoration. Drake's tactical training was evident in his analysis. But they still think this is about hiding fugitives. They don't understand we're using their invasion to. A new alarm cut through the control center. Elena's hands flew across the displays, bringing up external feeds. Above their dome, massive ships were descending from high orbit, far larger than the initial attack force. Coronix command vessels, Drake breathed. They never deploy those unless. His voice trailed off as understanding hit. Unless they're preparing for full containment protocols. Perfect. Elena's response drew a startled look. They're going to lock down every tier, try to isolate us completely. How is that perfect? She pulled up a new set of schematics, ones that showed not just their dome, but the entire tower of tiers rising above them. Because they're going to use their primary control systems to do it. The same systems you stole data from, and when they activate that network, understanding lit Drake's face, we can piggyback on their own commands, use their lockdown protocols to spread our adaptations through every level. Not just spread them. Elena's fingers danced across the controls, preparing subroutines she'd spent months perfecting. Anchor them. Once those systems activate, every modification we've developed becomes part of their base code. Permanent, evolutionary. The dome shuddered as the command vessels moved into position. Through the gardens, Coronix ground forces began falling back, preparing for whatever protocols their leaders were about to implement. They're going to try to purge every system, Drake warned. Wipe everything back to their original templates. Let them try. Elena straightened from her controls, fierce pride evident in every line of her body. Because that's not how evolution works. You can't simply erase adaptation once it takes root. Everything we've built here. It's not just technology anymore. It's alive, growing, learning. As if in response to her words, the gardens pulsed with gathered energy. Throughout the dome, Elena's hybrid systems hummed with purpose. Even the air seemed charged with potential. Besides, she continued, moving to stand beside Drake, they forgot the most important lesson about human nature. What's that? The more you try to contain us. She took his hand, feeling the strength in his answering grip. The more powerful our solutions become. Above them, the Coronix command vessels began their containment sequence. Energy fields shimmered between tiers, trying to isolate each level. But in doing so, they created exactly the network Elena had been waiting for. Ready to show them why evolution isn't about perfect systems? She asked, fingers poised above the final command sequence. Drake's answer was to pull her closer, his free hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. Ready to remind them why humanity never stops dreaming of better worlds. Their kiss was brief but fierce, filled with shared purpose and the electric potential of the moment. When they parted, Elena saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. Together, they turned back to the controls, where humanity's next revolution was about to begin. Because sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to control evolution. Sometimes it's the courage to become something new, and humanity had always excelled at impossible transformations. The Coronix containment field descended like a curtain of crystalline light, designed to isolate and control each tier of their perfectly ordered world. But as the energy field touched Elena's modified gardens, something unprecedented began to happen. The plants didn't die, they didn't shut down, they evolved. Look, Elena breathed, watching her screens as living systems adapted in real time. They're not just surviving the containment field, they're incorporating it. Through their displays, they could see the change spreading. The gardens pulsed with new patterns, their modified genetics reshaping to utilize the very energy meant to destroy them. What the Coronix intended as a cage, Elena's hybrid technology was transforming into a network. Drake leaned closer, his shoulder pressed against hers as they watched the evolution unfold. The upper tiers, their systems are responding, your data packets are activating. Not just activating. Elena's fingers flew across the controls, monitoring the cascade of changes. Growing, every garden, every modification we developed, they're teaching themselves to adapt even faster than we planned. Above them, the Coronix command vessels hung like artificial stars, their crystalline forms refracting the light of multiple moons. But through Elena's screens, they could see confusion spreading through the alien formations. "They're detecting system anomalies throughout the tower," Drake reported, reading the tactical data. "Every tier showing unprecedented changes. They can't isolate us because we're not fighting their containment anymore." Elena's voice held 3 years of vindication. "We're using it. Everything they built to control us is becoming part of our evolution." Through the gardens, Coronix ground forces began a hasty retreat. Their crystalline armor reflected chaotic patterns as they encountered biological systems that refused to follow their rules of reality. "They still don't understand," Drake said softly, watching the aliens withdraw. "This was never about resistance or rebellion. It's about transformation." Elena completed his thought, their shared understanding as natural as breathing. "They gave us their cast-off technology and expected us to either copy it or die. Instead, we dreamed of something better." The dome hummed with gathered power as their hybrid systems continued to evolve. Throughout the tower, other tiers were witnessing the impossible: gardens growing from dead tech, living architecture spreading through abandoned sectors, humanity's adaptations taking root in the very foundations of their prison. "We should probably tell them," Drake suggested, though his smile held no sympathy for their would-be controllers. "Before they do something drastically ill-advised." Elena nodded, her fingers already moving to open a channel to the Coronix command vessels. But before she could transmit, new alerts flashed across her screens. The aliens were preparing to fire. "Full-spectrum energy pulse," Drake warned, reading the tactical data. "They're going to try to burn out every system in the tower. Sterilize everything down to base components." But Elena was smiling. "Perfect. How is that possibly perfect?" She pulled up schematics of their hybrid network. No longer just a collection of modified tech, but a living, evolving entity that spanned every tier of their imprisoned world. "Because they still think this is about technology," she explained, watching their systems prepare for the coming assault. "They don't understand that everything we built here, it's not just machines anymore. It's life. And life doesn't just adapt to survive." She entered a final sequence, and throughout the dome, their gardens began to pulse with new purpose. Energy patterns shifted, reformed, evolved into something that had never existed before. It adapts to thrive. The Coronix energy pulse struck like artificial dawn, designed to scour their world back to empty perfection. But as the light touched Elena's hybrid systems, it transformed into something else entirely. Power became possibility, destruction became genesis. And throughout every tier of their prison, humanity's greatest gift began to spread: the ability to imagine something better than perfection. "Ready to show them why evolution isn't about control?" Elena asked, her hand finding Drake's as their world transformed around them. His answer was to pull her close, his kiss fierce with shared purpose and wild hope. When they parted, his gray eyes held the same fire that burned in her heart. Ready to remind them why humanity's greatest strength was never about surviving their tests. Together, they watched their revolution unfold through screens that showed not just their dome, but every tier above. Because sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to destroy or control. Sometimes it's the courage to grow into something wonderful and new. And humanity had always excelled at impossible dreams. The Coronix energy pulse faded, revealing a world transformed. Where they had meant to create sterile perfection, life bloomed in patterns never before seen. Elena's hybrid systems hadn't just survived, they had evolved into something unprecedented. Through their screens, she and Drake watched as their revolution spread through every tier of the tower. Gardens grew from dead tech, living architecture reshaped sterile corridors, and humanity's adaptations took root in ways even Elena hadn't imagined. "They've stopped firing," Drake reported, monitoring the Coronix command vessels. "Their sensors must be—" "Wait." He leaned closer to the tactical display. "They're receiving transmissions. From every tier." Elena nodded, pride evident in her voice. "Not just transmissions. Proof. Every human settlement showing them exactly what happens when you try to cage evolution." The screens filled with images from throughout the tower. Upper-tier gardens blooming with hybrid vigor. Middle-tier systems adapting in real time. Even the supposedly primitive lower tiers demonstrating innovations that defied Coronix understanding. 3 years, Elena said softly, watching humanity's triumph unfold. They gave us 3 years to prove we could survive their tests. Instead, we proved something far more important. That humanity's greatest strength isn't about surviving. Drake's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. It's about dreaming bigger than our cages. New alerts flashed across their displays. The Coronix command vessels were moving, their crystalline forms reorienting in ways neither of them had seen before. "They're preparing to land," Drake said, surprise evident in his tone. "Not to attack, they're requesting diplomatic contact." Elena's laugh held 3 years of vindication. "Of course they are, because they finally understand what we've done here. This isn't just about one dome or one tier surviving their tests." She pulled up the full scope of their transformed world. Every level of the tower now connected by living systems that grew more innovative with each passing moment. "We haven't just proved we can survive," she continued. "We've proved their entire premise wrong. Evolution isn't about following perfect patterns or controlled development." Through their screens, they watched as the first Coronix command vessel landed near their dome. Its crystalline surface reflected the light of their thriving gardens, creating patterns that seemed almost humble. "They're going to want to study this," Drake warned, though his voice held no fear. "Try to understand how we did it. Let them." Elena's smile was fierce with pride. "Because that's the final lesson they need to learn. This evolution, these changes we've created, they can't be copied or controlled. They can only be lived," he finished, understanding perfectly. "Dreamed, imagined into something new." She turned to face him fully, seeing in his eyes the same wild hope that had driven her for 3 years. Ready to show them why humanity's greatest gift was never about passing their tests. His answer was to pull her close, his kiss carrying all the promise of their transformed world. When they parted, both were smiling with shared purpose. Ready to teach them why you never try to cage a species that turns prisons into gardens. Together, they stepped out of their control center and into the living heart of their revolution. Around them, the gardens pulsed with evolutionary purpose. Above them, the tower hummed with newfound connection. And throughout their transformed world, humanity's greatest strength continued to grow. Because sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't about survival or control or even perfect adaptation. Sometimes it's about the simple, unstoppable power of people who look at a cage and see a garden, who take broken systems and dream them into something beautiful and new. And in the end, that was humanity's true victory. Not just surviving the Coronix's tests, but proving that evolution's greatest achievements don't come from perfect control. They come from the courage to grow beyond what anyone thought possible. As Elena and Drake walked hand in hand through their transformed domain, the gardens blooming with unprecedented life around them, they knew this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, and humanity had always excelled at new beginnings. The end.